phone. That's pretty amazing.
He is. This is wife two. His other phone is wife one.
Oh, fine. There's
and
two.
I'm wife three. So no, I'm not. I'm wife four. He has a third phone. So
That is funny.
yeah, I think he was more concerned that I was without a phone. So
There you go. Okay. Okay.
Okay, good. So, welcome to our second part in the series of 5, I think, total on parenting. What I find ironic about parenting is that kids are going to grow up anyway, with or without great or not great parenting. So almost doesn't matter. Please forgive me for saying it that way. You've got plenty of children, Rahman Islam, who are orphans, and they figure out how to make something out of their lives. My own Rebbe was orphaned at 6 years old. He has over 100 grandchildren. It's quite astonishing how life unfolds despite or whether or not I've got great parents. I think it's also extremely telling that for the most part, all our patriarchs and our matriarchs had sordid backgrounds. They did not have the most incredible support. Avraham Avinu's father turned him into Nimrod. And if you ask any psychologist today on a 0 to 10 scale of pain, what is betrayal of a parent to a child, I think it will be completely off the charts. 10 is just not enough. It's maybe 100, a few hundred, whatever. And how long will it take to recover? You're scarred for life. So I just want to put it into perspective. Children are extremely brilliant and resilient. And with whatever good parenting I do and whatever mistakes I make, they're going to grow up. The reason I'm saying that, even though it's obvious, is I want to kind of take a little bit out of the equation anxiety that's associated with me being so invested in my child that if I don't see the outcome of my expectation, that must be a reflection on me. And the reason I want to take that a little bit out of the equation as much as possible is because the vast majority of factors in the raising of a child are really actually outside of my control. And that has to do with the influence of neighbors, grandparents, cousins, extended family that I might not see eye to eye in their value system. And so I might feel more protective of my child, and in doing so, it can get a little bit messy. So that I have little or no control over what's going on the moment my child is on the bus until they get off the bus. And even then, I don't have eyes at the back of my head to see what's going on in the bedroom. There's so many factors as a child, especially as they get older, that it becomes a very humbling experience for a parent to recognize when their children get married and then raise their own children, realizing how much of an influence I was. Oh my gosh, if I had known that, I would have tried to be even a better role model. And then how much of an influence I wasn't, because my kid, for whatever good, bad, right, wrong reasons, ended up gravitating to a particular Rebbe or Rebbitzin or some other role model more than their own parent, which becomes maybe a challenge for me on a personal level, but also, hey, this child gravitated for a reason to that particular adult, and that adult became a different type of influence that has shaped much more of the child's value system, or goes to that person for questions and clarity as opposed to a parent. And I'm just saying up front, it's all good, because in the end, it almost doesn't make a difference. It almost doesn't make a difference. In the words of the Chavetz Chaim, he actually says that parenting is 100% siyata dishmaya, is 100% God's divine supervision and help. The only reason we are so invested, we do our absolute best, is because Hashem made us umbilically related to this child. We brought the child into the world. He wants us to be involved so that we can say we did our best. But actually, even with our best, we're not in control of the results. So without going into much detail, you look at Rachel and Leah. These were twins. Their father was Lavan. He was a gangster, a cheat, no good. He was a brilliant manipulator, extremely deceptive. And Yaakov, who was extraordinarily smart and wise, nevertheless was cheated by his father-in-law many, many, many times. So we're all in very good company when we consider that our own imahis and our own avos. Rivka, her father was Besuel. He was a rotten waste of space. If he's really saying that. His real name wasn't even Besuel. He's called Besuel in the Torah because he was Baal Besulis. He was such a sick man. He was the king of Aram Naharaim, which is the area of Turkey today. He was the king of that land, and he had a law that every bride had to visit him the night before the wedding. So this is the sick man who fathered Rivka Imenu. Rivka's brother was Lavan. That, by the way, is just add-on information, is why she saw through her son Esav, and Yitzhak didn't. Because Yitzhak wasn't raised with parents who had that type of manipulation in the family, but Rivka was, and she could see those signs. She was able to tell much sooner if there's a fake narrative taking place over here, disguised as fact. So she could see right through it. Yitzhak did not, and that's why Esav was able to manipulate his parents, or his mother not, but his father yes. So it's interesting that Avram Avinu had a very sordid background. His father wasn't even a religious Christian. I mean, he sold Avodah Zarah for money. He didn't even believe in it himself. So it wasn't even sincere. What type of a parent is that? So you put these pieces together, we're in extremely good company when we consider that the Torah actually goes out of its way to tell us that these are actually the founders of our religion, and it wasn't dependent on how amazing the parenting they got from their parents was. So this is very encouraging for us because we've already got an unbroken Masorah of 3,336 years of instructions of how to live, and how to live a moral life, how to live a life of an ethical compass internally that helps us guide where to go. And when I'm not sure, so have a teacher, a rabbi, rebbe, etc., rebbetzin to get guidance from. So in a certain way, we're way ahead of the game. But at least to point out right from the beginning that whatever we do we are not in control of the result. Our efforts, yes, results not. So I'm going to jump right in. The actual title of this presentation is Children Spell Love, T.I.M.E. It's a 4-letter word, but I'm not sure if it's really 100% true, and I'm going to explain to you. It can go both ways. There are children who did not get a lot of time from their parents, but still felt their parents' love. Then you've got kids who got a lot of love and a lot of time from their parents, and you could argue that actually really contributed to who they became. I think of Ben Shapiro, who is a very interesting influencer in the world today, and a very young one at that. So I recently met his father and mother. I stayed in their home for a couple of days, which I went only for teacher training in Boca Raton, but I got so much out of listening to what was going on in Ben Shapiro's childhood. It was mind-boggling. The father's a composer, musician, has a lot of famous music from many, many movies from Hollywood. They used to live in California. They moved to be in a Republican state. Completely understand that. That was a commercial that was sponsored by the Republican Party. Okay, so he told me that his son Ben was speaking at the age of 15 months, full conversations, and that the parents, being Baalei Tshuva, had the confidence, if I'm allowed to say that term, to have all sorts of guests at the meals on Shabbos, and in doing so, this young child who already had a very active mind, because it's very interesting, the sooner a child learns to speak, and the more vocabulary they are exposed to, the more vocabulary they have to actually interpret the world around them. That's why reading is so important. In Montessori, that's huge. The whole world is opened up when a child actually can make sense out of letters combined into words and then build their vocabulary. It's really huge. And if anyone wants to learn more about that, then I would recommend looking at Marva Collins. Marva Collins, who was a brilliant educator. She taught first grade for many, many years, and then she became principal of the same school. She worked in Chicago with children in the classroom who, for the most part, they didn't know who their real fathers were. for those who were alive, or either in prison, or dead, or part of gangs, and that was the norm. And I've listened to interviews of the first graders and pre 1Aers, which were in the same class. It was a multi-class. That was by default, not because of choice. But and she had. I was listening to 5 and 6 year olds in her school who were talking about Macbeth. They were reading at a very high level. And she brought this about not because of what they were exposed at home, but in the classroom, every single day she would teach them more words. And then she would say, Tom, what does conscience mean? Simon, what is circumference? And she would spot check throughout this class of 20 plus children. What ended up happening is that the children's vocabulary kept building till they had more words to talk to themselves about the world they're living in. They became so much interested in Macbeth and Shakespeare. It was astonishing to listen to 5, 6, and 7 year olds, boys and girls, describe their favorite character and the plot and the dynamics between the families in the plays. And if I didn't hear it with my own ears, I could not possibly believe it. You hear these young children, and there's nothing that's really mysterious about it, because children are brilliant. They are all brilliant. We mentioned it earlier that at the moment of conception, the child is a microscopic brain and heart. And in the next 40 days, that child literally creates, because of its divine intelligence, creates its own skeletal system, muscular system, respiratory system, nervous systems. It's astonishing. This child is amazing. And in the first 1.5, 2 years of their life, they are, for the most part, silent, except for a few noises with pain or hunger or actual pain, hospital. But what's this brilliant brain busy doing in those first 2 years? We're expecting such great things, and yet they're so totally dependent on mum, to some extent dad. And the answer is they are collecting thousands and thousands of sounds and images and making sense out of it. And when they start articulating, their articulation is based on the vocabulary they have been exposed to. So I found it fascinating that this young man, Ben Shapiro, had so much time with dad at home from a childhood all the way through, and they're still very close. And it's interesting that Ben Shapiro loves being a father today. The time he has with his young children is sacred to him. So I'm bringing out that there are situations where a person's mind is built. I think you would agree, this is a personality example who, if you were to give a 0 to 10 scale rating for self-esteem, 0 would be the least, 10 is the most, you would say he's off the charts. And I don't have an analysis to prove it, but I am of the opinion that when a parent has a good relationship with the child and speaks to the child, exposing the child to the adult world, which is the mind of the adult, and not baby the child as talk with baby talk, what ends up happening is that the child's maturity level grows much faster at an accelerated pace. I'm not saying that's necessary, they still need to play with their friends and peers, but if we're talking about spending time, that's one way to look at it, that the more time we spend with our children, and I'm not talking about the number of hours, I really am not. You know, for a number of decades, the term came out, quality time. I want to pay attention to the fact that a parent might not have a lot of time to spend with their children, and they might not have a lot of quality time either. But what I am going to claim, this is the bottom line up front, so you can fall asleep after this, the bottom line up front, which I really do believe is true, is that even if a parent who's extremely busy for whatever reasons, and doesn't have that much time for their children, but whenever they interface, and I'm choosing that word deliberately, whenever they are interfacing, they have eye contact, the parents are happy in the child's presence. Because every smile is a very powerful statement. I'm happy, you exist in my life. And the conversations, even if they're short, and that's why Shabbos and Yom Tov is so precious. I'll be honest with you, most of the time raising my kids, and even till today, I very rarely, my wife and I very rarely go to any simchas except family, because especially while they're growing up, if I start doing that, even though it might be a little bit offensive to close friends and etc. But where are my kids? Why am I home with my children? I'm not making that a guilt trip. I'm just giving as an example children who have mom and dad home, at least in the evenings, even if it's a short period of time, and if not, at least Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's a huge statement to the child. I am in your life in a way that matters. And every time the child sees mom and dad smile, it's a huge commercial. It's a very good commercial, because the children today are being exposed to thousands and thousands of images, possibly on an almost daily basis. And with that, they are exposed to thousands of pop-ups that are coming up on screens and devices that is selling a totally different value system to that which they might be receiving either at school or at home, and that becomes a huge competition. How do you compete with that? And the answer is if you had a camera, and some people do have cameras, almost at every angle of every building, internally and externally, if you were to have a click in the technology that would click every single time that mum, dad crossed each other through the corridors in the house, coming in, out of the bathroom, the bedroom, living room, the kitchen, etc., and had eye contact with their child, and that camera would click it, it would come out possibly hundreds of clicks a day. I don't know the exact number, but the point is, the child's brain is taking in every sound, every image, and the fact that the child feels my mum loves me, my father loves me, and especially when there is time on Shabbos, whether it's learning together, which is huge. T.I.M.E mitzvahs is a great platform for learning together. That's why I created pictures out of them. And if not, that's a commercial for that particular product. But there's so many stories out there that can be told at the Shabbos table that become conversation platforms. There's a fantastic series called What If, which has amazing stories. Some of them are from the imagination, some are real stories. And then the question becomes, what's the halachic outcome of this? And it becomes a real debate. And it's something that the children can discuss. And you don't have to read the final analysis at the end of the various opinions till you've discussed it with each other. But what does come out is that the children's minds are being fine-tuned to discern and distinguish, and in that sense discriminate between right, wrong, good, bad. What's the halakhic application in this situation? There's a lot of and there's about 5, 6, maybe more volumes at this point. There's a tremendous explosion of Judaica that is user-friendly for parents on Shabbos, especially in Yom Tov, that even if I don't have time during the week, that's an amazing opportunity to spend with kids. So I was using Ben Shapiro as an example because he was exposed to adults at Shabbos meals, and with them, their full spectrum of their life experiences. And so even though he would end up playing with children his age, his mind was that of an adult, and he would think like an adult and think beyond. He reads about 3 books a week. I'm not singling him out per se, but I'm giving a little bit of the background of when a person has natural curiosity nurtured throughout his childhood and beyond, then everything is interesting to them. And if a person's raised in a Torah home, or at least has a lot of Torah injected from role models in the school, what ends up happening is that children are wearing different lenses when they're looking at the world. Because they're looking through the lenses of what would my mother say, what would my father say, how would my father do this, how would my mother do this. I know now that I'm an orphan. I lost my father 10 years ago, my mother I lost about 18 years ago, but so I felt very privileged that I lost my mother when I was in my 50s, my father when I was 58, so I'm not sure about the exact math, but there are three people in the world of math: those who can count and those who can't. So now you know where I am. So I find it fascinating that it was really only after I lost my parents that I was starting to pay a different level of maturity in a fine-tuned way to what they represented through their personality. And in doing so, it was very striking. I just wished so much that I had that appreciation while they were alive to actually say it to them. Especially, I was exposed to my father so much more because he came to visit my family for 3 weeks, Pesach, ended up for 1.5 years with a physical condition where there was a problem with the circulation of his blood, and trying to avoid surgery didn't work. After about 1 year, he needed an amputation, and that didn't work, so he needed a second amputation on the same leg. And then he's 91 years old, his kidneys failed, and then had to be on dialysis, and the only opening was 3 o'clock 4 o'clock in the morning, but had to be woken up at 3 to be taken in the ambulance to this twice a week. And what was extraordinary to me is that he was in and out of hospitals and rehab for a year and a half. And this is how many times he complained. 0. It was astonishing. There was one time, Dr. Brickman in Mount Sinai Hospital, my father was in the ICU, and he was reading a book. And Dr. Brickman walked in and said, Mr. Rieti, do you know where you are? You know, in the ICU, you're not supposed to be drugged up and exhausted. You're not supposed to have the mind to pay attention to reading. It was astonishing to me. My father was in over 250 movies in his lifetime. But what was interesting is that even though the screen was on, every time I walked into his bedroom, his head was inside a book. He was reading or learning or writing. He wrote 2 books in that year and a half. The screen was on because his carers, who we had on rotation, they were watching all the time. And my father was in the world of movies. That was his whole life, and yet that was not an interest to him. Even as I grew up, my father, I never saw him sit down and watch a movie on his own. He might do it as a family, but never on his own. It was something. He was more interested in spending time with me and my siblings. I'll never forget on one movie, these are short memories. I'm giving you examples of someone who was extremely busy in his life. And yet what stuck out was, on one occasion, he engaged me many, many times for voiceovers, that's dubbing, revoicing in movies. So there was a movie called The Star of David. It was a Holocaust movie, actually. And we had to go out to Dusseldorf in Germany to revoice different parts of the movie. And each night there were cocktail parties, and there were some of the actresses were quite well known, and I wanted to rub shoulders with them, and my father had no interest. He was more interested in staying in the hotel and talking together. So, and that really stuck out for me, because that's a value. He valued me more than I valued that time, because I thought, hey, I want to go and tell my friends who I was for a cocktail, etc. I was about 21 years old at the time. What struck me also, I'm giving you just examples. Whenever I walked with my father and I saw how he treated, he was a director of dubbing. He was the best in the world in voiceovers. He was called the King of Dubbers, and the dubber, I think, is the origin of dubber, but he was also known as a man of 1,000 voices. And one movie he did 98 voices out of 102 voices, because the whole, I don't know if you remember Christopher Plummer, some of you might have heard that name. He starred in a movie called Waterloo, Battle of Waterloo. So the entire soundtrack was destroyed, a terrible tragedy for the production. So they took my father on, and he did 98 out of 102 voices. No one could tell the difference. Only me and the sound technicians in there. The point, though, is when he engaged other actors and actresses to revoice a part in their movie, which they had to come back and do because the soundtrack went, or they'd lost their voice to laryngitis during the movie, and now they have to revoice at the end. What struck for me was 2 things. And I'm just giving you snippets because my father did not have a lot of time with me. I don't remember a lot of time with my father. But the small clips I'm putting together, I realized really shaped so much of my own mindset. So for example, it was typical of him that whenever an actor or an actress didn't perform their best, he would find something good about that particular performance, and then instead of saying the word but, always added the word and. If you can inflex your voice over here, I think it's going to come out even better. So it was interesting to me that he would first find something good and then improve on it. And actors and actresses I saw, they enjoyed working with him because they didn't feel like criticized. They felt that he was squeezing out of them the best performance they could do. So that was number 1. Number 2 is that my father would pay every actor and actress as they left the studio, right on the spot. And even during my shiva, when my father passed away, I had his phone and it rang, and it was an actor on the other line who wanted to speak to my father. Some of you might know that the world of acting and actors and actresses is really, really depressing. 90% of actors and actresses, 90% are out of work. 10% are employed all the time. So those are the stars that you hear about, But the vast majority, they have to find other work because they're not employed all the time, and they're always taking small parts. So it's interesting that he called. He wanted to ask my father if he's got any openings for him. So I apologized to him that my father just passed away. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." And the first thing he said is, "I loved working with your father. He always brought the best out of me, and I never left the studio without him giving me my check." And I knew that because I saw that. So I know that's something that happens to me. My wife has the same type of hakpada, like very careful that we pay workers on time, etc. But she had a parent who was very much like that too. But this is something that my father never told me I have to do. It's just the way he lived. So it's really, parenting is not about a script. It's really who we are that's parenting our child. And to whatever extent that I'm improving myself, so the commercial that I am is going to get a bit better. And when I make a mess up, I didn't say if, when I make a mess up, hey, there's going to be another commercial. Because there's going to be another interface with the child where they'll see my smile, or they'll see the hug, or I'll apologize if that's appropriate for something I said that wasn't fair because I've got my own stress and I took it out on my kid, and then I apologize. The kids can handle sincerity much better than me denying that it's really the kid's fault, and I stay with that narrative. But if it really was my fault, that I was stressed out and I got unnecessarily angry, upset, and the kid hears me apologize, as long as it doesn't happen all the time, frequently, the kid can handle sincerity because they are dying. I use my language very deliberately. They're dying for mommy and daddy to be the best role models that they can have in their lives. You are the best chance for your kids. Outside of that, there's grandparents, there's good role modeling from uncles and aunts, older siblings sometimes, but the main role models are us, the parents. If a child doesn't get it from us, they will look elsewhere. And we have less control over who that is, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's the parents of a friend that they're sleeping over at, or counselors in a sleepaway camp. There's so many things we have no control over, but the extent to which we become more and more the compass that points the needle in the direction of right, wrong, good, bad, what my mum, what my dad say in a situation like this, that is the extent to which we really do have a deep influence on our children, to the point that almost all the Sfarim that write about the mitzvah of Kibbut Aveim tell us the following language. Ikar Kibbut Aveim, the main mitzvah of honoring a father and mother, Achrei Misasam, is after they die. Because during the lifetime, when we talk, smile, greet, give a drink, something to eat, help them in any which way, especially as they get elderly, that's all in this world. But in the next world, the currency is totally different. They don't need any physical things that we are no longer able to do, so we no longer have that great mitzvah. But the mitzvah of what we do in this world that is good is accredited to them automatically. So all of that is much more valuable to them, and therefore the main mitzvah of Kibbut Avim actually takes place after they've moved on. When I first read that, and it was after my mother passed away, I took tremendous comfort from that, realizing, oh my gosh, I can still do the mitzvah in a way that's actually even more meaningful than when she was alive. So the bottom line is, it's never the last chapter till the last chapter. And the beauty about the last chapter is that even after 120 years, that's not the last chapter. Because after T.I.M.E, resurrection of the dead, there's a reunion, and then every person's starting point from where they left off in this world is their starting point of platform from which they continue growing after T.I.M.E. So let's get now into a bit more of the actual mechanics of parenting. I've placed on the board the answer to the question, where do we see the mitzvah to parent our children? So it's interesting, you can find various verses throughout Tanakh, but the actual mitzvah deraisa, the Torah mitzvah of, and I'm going to mistranslate only because that's the popular translation, and people won't know what I'm talking about if I translate it correctly. So I'm going to say the mistranslation is teach your children, and it's found in the words Vishinantam. Vishinantam levanecha, it's part of the Shema. Now what's really strange about this word, and it is a strange word, it's not a common word, is it has nothing to do with teaching. I can't say nothing to do, but it's not a direct word which says teach. V'limatem oisam, which is in the second paragraph of the Shema, which is in chapter 11 of Deuteronomy, this is in chapter 6. But in chapter 11, v'limatem oisam, doesn't even mean teach them. It actually means cause them to learn, which fits perfectly with the Montessori model, where you're investing in the fact that the child already learned everything in the womb of its mother, and therefore learning now is not all new. It's actually a process of retrieval. So by asking questions, you're helping the child's brain to figure out the answer themselves. By asking questions, you're working on the predicate the child can figure this out. So you're really building the child's self-esteem, self-estimation in a very real way, because the child is being constantly complimented by a question, as opposed to being given the information. It's not a delivery of information. So unfortunately, this doesn't really, unfortunately, but this is an innocent mistranslation to teach your child or teach your child diligently. It's not completely off the mark, but if we take our own language seriously, then we're allowed to ask the most obvious question. God, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the Universe, you chose this word here. Help us to unpack it, because in this word you're going to have the mechanics of the relationship between V'shinatam Levanecha, who are your children, Elu Habanim, Elu HaTalmidim. Your students are your children are your students, and everyone who has exposure to you are your students. We are all teachers by default. Whether we are paid for it or we're not paid for it, we're all teaching just by our role modeling. There's more to be said on that, but I'm just going to keep to Vishinantam. What's the two-letter root of Vishinantam? We've touched on this before. What's the two-letter root? Yes. Thank you, Dr. Silverman. It's your profession. So, Shane actually literally means tooth. So if we were to translate this correctly, one of the translations would be teeth to your children. That sounds a bit odd. What do we mean teeth to your children? That's weird. Well, not really. If this is a choice, that means it's very real. So when do your children see your teeth? Oh, when you're smiling. So in an indirect way, it's telling you, smile to your children. Because smiling is a very powerful message. I'm happy. You exist in my life. And so when a person is passionate about their teaching, it's a different level of teaching than when it's just about the paycheck. Hey, the paycheck, that's bonus. If the person loves teaching, it's visible just from the way they are passionate about sharing information or excited to help build the mind of the child and grow the mind and see the mind of the child grow. That's what's exciting. So doing that through smiling is number one. And I mentioned before, Rabbi Shimon Schwab of blessed memory told me that the most powerful tool of discipline that a teacher has is actually their removal of their smile. Because if a person is smiling consistently in the classroom or at home, and then the teacher or parent looks at the child, the first question that's going through the mind of the kid is, what did I do wrong? Meaning, so they're going to be putting the mirror in front of themselves, as opposed to defending or denying or excusing or arguing back, because the connection has been broken. The smile is a connection, and by taking the smile away, it forces the child to ask, why is mom, dad disconnecting from me? Why is the teacher not connecting? And immediately the child will chop, and the law of recency hopefully will help them discover the actual cause of the supposed disconnect. So that's just a bonus piece of information. So Shane means teeth because it's smiling. And what's the major function of the tooth or your teeth? What's the major function of all the functions of your teeth?
Sustenance, eating.
Yeah, so eating. And the specific act of eating is?
Chewing.
And when you're chewing, I mentioned this earlier, but we're just unpacking Vishinantam because we're going to see that the entire world of parenting is really in the Shema Yisrael. You don't even have to go to Tosh Balpeh or research it or Faber Maslich, it's all good stuff, but in reality, it cannot be that God, who gave us this language, didn't give us inside it all the pieces we need to have at least the guidelines of who I am in my relationship to this child. So it's interesting that in the act of chewing, it's the only moment that a child who sees mum chewing, dad chewing, there's chewing where I'm busy. And where's my mind? My mind's not on the chewing. But what happens if this is really your favorite chocolate? Dark chocolate in my case. So it's evident that you're savoring the taste of the food by chewing it and chewing it. According to Rambam and Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and Simon Lamed Beis, says chew your food to liquid. Don't eat your food, drink it. What does it mean drink your food? Chew it to liquid, because there are a number of benefits. This is bonus information here. But number one is you actually end up eating less food because you reach satiation earlier for the fact that the food is liquid in your mouth before it's swallowed. So it's much easier, number two benefit, on the digestive process, because your stomach has less work to do, much less taxing. That's benefit number two. And number three, you actually enjoy the food more because you're savoring the taste. So Vishinantam is a very interesting language. It's smile to your children, but it also means that the way we live our life, enjoying it, savoring the taste of life, that is what we are transferring to our children. How we handle our lives, with or without a smile, with or without complaints. That is really what our kids are picking up on more than anything else. Even there's recent research that's just coming forth, but this is actually a Gemara as well, but even while the child is in the womb of its mother, it hears everything, and that has an influence. This has actually been proven scientifically by Dr. Suzuki. I think may have mentioned him. Professor Suzuki, he has a school of music that if you know anyone who wants to sign up, they have to sign up before pregnancy. During pregnancy, they have to play the same Mozart or Beethoven concerto thousands of times, and even after birth for the next 3 or 4 years, the same concerto again and again and again. After that, then the child's brought around about 4 years old to Professor Suzuki for the first time, and the child, this is like a 4-year-old, is given a cello or a violin to the scale of the size of their chest and arms, and all they have to do, and it just takes a few hours, to pay attention to which movement of the bow against the strings of the violin match the sounds that have been playing in the mind of the child thousands and thousands of times. Which means that the acute awareness of the child's mind to pay attention to tempo and beat and rhythm and the difference between one sound and another they're so acutely aware at this point that the physical movement is just an attempt to match the sound they already have inside, and they learn to play violin and other instruments in a very short amount of time, relatively speaking. And then by 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, you got about 100 kids. You can watch this on, you can Google this on. You'll see these 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds playing a perfect concerto to an audience of a couple thousand people, and all these adults in the audience drop their jaws open at the extraordinary. How can it be? You've got so many brilliant, musically gifted children. And the answer is, none of them might have been actually musically gifted. It's just that because from the time of conception onwards, the child's mind, which is building its body and later learning words and vocabulary, such that if you expose a child in the first 2 years to 2 or 3 languages, that's how many languages the kid will, that's how brilliant they are. This child will pick up a musical instrument much more easily, and even compose music more easily, because their mind has been acutely. So we're saying that parenting in a certain way actually starts before they're born, because the child's picking up on tone of voice, the warmth, and even the apologies, and the shouting and the apology after the shout. Everything is picked up, and nothing is permanently bad, because no matter how many mistakes I make, Hashem has given us 2 huge ways out. Number 1, teshuvah, and number 2, if you had to repeat your entire childhood, starting now, how many hours would you need to describe the first 10 years? Or would you have a real challenge to describe all the memories you can remember for the first 10 years of your life? Hashem gave a gift to children that they don't remember much of their childhood. The role modeling is there, but they don't have the articulation till they're much more mature with enough emotional vocabulary to describe what they remember in terms of insights. But the mistakes that we do make on our kids, Hashem gave them a blessed memory not to necessarily remember all of them, except if it's really, really extreme. But that's a gift, so that we always have a second chance, a second chance, a second chance. And even if I mess up big time, God gives us another chance through our grandchildren. So we never despair. All right, so Vishinantam is a very interesting term. It means smile, and it also means savor the taste. So it's how we actually live the mitzvahs at home or in front of our children that is what we're selling. It's the joy that we have and how we enjoy learning or davening or saying a bracha. It's not the regimental element, the rigid part of the halacha that the kids are necessarily picking up on, unless that's what I'm fixated on. It's really the joy of being a Jew, the joy of being a religious Jew. That's what's coming out of the Shinantam. Now we get to the actual word shinun. Shinun is an interesting term. It has two meanings in Lashon HaKodesh. Neither of them translate correctly as teach or teaching. Shinun has two meanings. It either means repetition. So the correct translation here would also be not just smile to your children, chew out of passion to your children. It also means repeat to your children. I'm going to get to what are we repeating. And the second meaning of shinun is sharpen. Sharpen. Now that works very beautifully, especially in the Torah model of the Jewish curriculum, which has been Hamisham in the Mikra. Children start reading Chumash around about 5, 6 years old. 10 years old they start Mishnayos, Labriut. 15 when they learn Gemara. That's the ideal situation. But the point that's being brought out is that the most important part of learning at the beginning is repetition. And the more the children repeat words and hear them again and again, as we had mentioned earlier with Marva Collins or Ben Shapiro, the more children hear words again and again, the more vocabulary they're building. They're not just adding one more word. They are actually building their ability to interpret this world exponentially. Because every single word now gives them a new entree into a sentence that contains that word and has a whole new meaning. So what ends up happening is by repeating the same information again and again and again, you are giving more and more vocabulary. That what ends up happening is the more information you have, what happens next that you couldn't do with so much information? The more you add more information, what can you do with that information? The bigger it gets, the larger it gets. And the answer is, if I have one pen here, there's a certain amount of information I can tell you about this single pen here. But the moment I add another pen, so now I can do something I couldn't do before, is I compare similarities, I contrast differences. And I build your mind in the sense that you can now discriminate, and understand different functions. If there would be two different pens completely, let's say for example, this pen here. So now you have even more differences that you can. The more information you have, the more questions you can ask. The more questions you can ask, the more you can discover, and the more you can discriminate, understand differences. The more you can lahavchin in Hebrew, discriminate between one thing and another, the sharper your mind becomes. So Bishinantam, it contains in it these two aspects of learning, which is repetition, which leads to sharpening the mind. Sharpening the mind means you can now ask questions that you couldn't ask before because you've got more information to ask it with. The more you get the tools of shoroshim, prefixes and suffixes, root words of Hebrew, prefixes and suffixes, and it's not a big deal. Those are three components in the learning skills that when a child has that, then the default ripple effect of that is the child can look at a word, decode it. Oh, Av means father. Avos, fathers. Avoseinu, our fathers. Le avoseinu, to our fathers. Ule avoseinu, and to our fathers. So a child can see what's the two-letter root in the middle, Av, and the prefixes at the beginning, Vav and Lamed, and the suffixes at the end, the Yud, the Nun and Vav. And now the child, because of that sharpening of the mind, when they look at the context of that word in this verse, they may easily realize, oh, there's something wrong with the way this verse is constructed. That creates a question that now requires discovery, exploration, understanding. And that's how you sharpen the mind of a child. So Vishinantam Levanecha, don't be lost on repeating to your children, say please. And the answer is always no, and they know, oh, please. I'm big on that. I know I come from England, so it's different. But and I think I may have mentioned a long time ago. I've heard from one Rebbetzin in Eretz Yisrael. She actually tells new Olim not to encourage children to say yes, please, and thank you, because that becomes a reason why kids who are degree in schools will tease them and bully them because they look like they're pushovers. What do you mean, please? Just push yourself in front. Don't wait. So I personally don't agree with that, but I'm explaining. You know, sometimes the culture can get such a contrast that you think that for the function of your child, they've got to fight like everyone else in order to survive. It happens to be that even Esav, when he's starving to death, uses the language of na, and na means please. It's a language of etiquette. It's a language of etiquette. It's a language of not just being polite, but it's a language of I'm not owed this by you. It's not owed to me. Lo magia li. And thank you is admitting I owe you a debt, and that's why I'm saying thank you. And that's why the word maida and haida and vidui share the same shorish, because thank you is a vidui. It's an admission that without the favor you did for me, I couldn't have afforded or couldn't have done what I did. So it's really all in the language. So it's the repetition of kind words. It's repetition of apologizing when I make a mistake, or getting the child to admit what they did wrong and then apologize to their sibling, etc. The less judgmental I can be, the better it's going to be for everyone, because my job as a parent is not to be a policeman, not to be an arbitrator. It's very difficult to avoid that, but really I can very rarely really know what happened, even if I saw it with my own eyes, because I don't necessarily, I have no clue what happened yesterday that was festering in the mind of one child, and that only now came out was really triggered by that same child, and now I think it's my child who's screaming at the one who hurt them yesterday, not realizing that they were hurt yesterday by the same child, and now that's really where it's coming from. It's not in isolation. So children very rarely are behaving in total isolation of no context. There's almost always a context. I saw that very much in the Montessori training, that teachers are encouraged to assume that the student has a reason for why they are upset or not doing well right now. And sometimes it has to do with, instead of disciplining the child, it could simply be a simple answer to the question, are you agitated because you're hungry? Did you have breakfast this morning? Did you sleep well? Oh, you came home late from Sheva Brachas, and that's why you're exhausted in class. So there can be so many reasons why a child might not be paying attention that I don't necessarily have to straight away go to surgery and remove the kid from the classroom before I've tried an alternative medicine, which might be a simple understanding. Do you need a few minutes in the corner there on the sofa, or in the library for a few minutes, and then I'll check on you in 5 minutes if you're ready to come back to the class. So that is something that is very encouraged in the Montessori training, and it makes a lot of sense, because adults are the same. Why would my acting out now be in isolation of what came before, and my anticipation of what might come afterwards if I don't stand up for myself in a very maybe stronger way than I'm used to? So there's always a context. So avoid being a policeman to my child, and by all means not arbitrator, but help them recognize that what they did just now was not appropriate, and apologize for it, and get the other one to apologize for what they said or did yesterday once I get a little bit more of the fuller picture.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I feel like I'm a policeman though, because
Yeah.
otherwise, like, my house doesn't function.
Right.
Like, I need to be scary, or it's over.
Yes.
I know.
I totally.
How do you, and I also repeat myself all day.
Right.
But there has to be, or maybe I'm wrong, but I feel
No,
like the
you-
dynamic has to be like a little bit of like.
So it's interesting, in the laws of chaos, of anger, the Rambam in Perek Beis in Hilchos Deis, he agrees with you totally. He actually says there are only two exceptions to anger when it can work, and he calls it kas panim, when I'm angry with my facial expressions, below kas panim, but not kas alev. It's not because I actually think or feel it. So that means, the examples he gives is when you've got a leader who has to get angry to keep people in check, and a parent who needs to get angry, but it's not anger because I hate you. I'm angry with your behavior, and I'm showing it to you on the outside. When I had the presence of mind with especially my 3 older boys, because there were 3 boys in a row, 2 years apart, and my wife always jokes that she never recovered. But when you got 3 boys in a row, it can get tough. And so when I had presence of mind, I actually would tell them afterwards. And I'll be honest with you, I follow King Solomon, who says, if you spare the rod, actually he doesn't say the word rod. He says, Hosech Shivtai. The word shevet means a scepter. So usually kings don't go around smashing their ministers and avadim with the scepter. The purpose of the scepter is an icon of authority. So if I don't push my authority, and sometimes I have to show my anger, you're 100% correct to keep them in check. Otherwise, it gets all hefka. So you're in very good company. Hosech es shivta is sones benoi. He ends up hating the child because the child has no boundaries and isn't kept in check. So you're 100% correct. And in chapter 23, verse 13 and 14, it's even stronger language where it says if one doesn't, and this is not popular today, but that's not because it's not true. It's simply culturally it became this way, and now we can argue it doesn't work anymore. But he does talk about if I don't hit my kid, then and I should not be afraid of them dying. They're not going to die from being hit. It's actually a pasuk in Mishlei. I'll quickly quote it to you. I think I said 23:13. Let's check my memory. A friend of mine went to the doctor recently. He said, Doctor, what's the matter? I said, my memory, I think I'm losing my memory. Oh my, when did you first notice this? When did I first notice what? Al timna minar musa. Don't be afraid of giving musa. Musa really means discipline. That's what musa means. Ki takenu b'ashevet, that when you hit them with a stick, lo yamus, he's not going to die. He's not going to die. Ata b'ashevet takenu, next verse, chapter 23, verse 14. Hit him with a stick, the nafsho mishol tatzil, and you're going to save him from shol, which is another word for Gehenna, meaning children who grow up without really seeing what authority is, end up by default pushing the line further and further until the police get involved or the judge has to give a verdict. It's that bad. So we're living in a generation where our children are, if you hit a child today, 4, 5 or 6 year olds might actually say, okay, I'm calling child abuse, 1-800 child abuse. It's not funny, but so now we're literally bullied into not disciplining our children that way. But I did do that with my kids, but the piece I wanted to bring out was, afterwards, when I had the presence of mind, I would say, did I hit you because I hate you? Or did I hit you because I love you and I can't have you saying those words to mommy or behaving that way because it's unruly, unacceptable, undisciplined? So I would leave it as a question. So I want the children to hear that question. They know the answer and they've got to answer it themselves. I'm going to jump into the last part of this. Vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam. Talk. Now, it doesn't say to them or with them. V'dibarta bam. Doesn't say lahem. Doesn't say to them. Speak with them. What's the difference? What's v'dibarta bam mean? Talk with them.
Conversation.
It's a conversation. So it's not a dictatorship. You can still be the chef of the menu who actually, you and I think we're choosing whatever food we want in the restaurant, but actually the chef has given you the menu to choose from, and there are times when that's not even available either. So in Montessori they famously will give children choices, but it's within the framework of what's available in that lesson or that work cycle, etc. So the dibarta bam really doesn't mean talk with them. That means get them to share their minds. You still have veto, you're still the parent, but it does mean that we are inviting the mind of a child to express themselves, because by doing so we're improving their self-esteem in the sense of I count, and when I don't count, because I have no voice in this classroom, I have no voice in this home, so it ends up that the pressure of not feeling I've got a voice means I've got to be louder outside of where I can be heard, and that can come out in ways that don't work socially. So the dibarta bam really means speak with them. One of my favorite examples of that is talk with your children, even at a young age, about the adult world, because they're exposed, especially today with the devices that we have. They are so overexposed to the world that if I don't get to them before the street does, the street will give its version of love. It will give its version of what's right and what's wrong, who's a male and who's a female, etc. It gets beyond wild. So I have an obligation really to speak with them. One of my favorite examples is to talk to them about bills. And I ask them to open up this particular mail and show them a credit bill, a credit card bill, and show them, oh look, here's the list of items we bought this month, here's the total at the bottom, and look what they say at the very bottom, in much larger print, minimum due. So which do you think I should pay? $1,768.43, or the minimum due, which is like, I don't know, $14, whatever it is. So your 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old's going to say, hey, you paid the $13. You go, why would you pay $1,700, $1,800? So then ask them, why are they being so nice to me? If I pay the minimum due, what will happen? Now legally they actually have to write on the back a chart of I forget how you say in the English word for it, where over the years this is how much you will pay if you pay somewhere between minimum and the full amount. So it comes out that actually you'll be paying about 600% more of the original item which you bought on sale by not paying the full amount at the end of the month. So help children understand how a credit card actually works, how the interest works, how does a mortgage work. It's not that complicated when you just want to show them the basic structure of how mortgages work. The bank is going to lend me money on interest, and my first few 100 checks are vast majority is interest, very little principal. It only starts switching around about halfway through the mortgage term, which is 15 or 30 years, and help the children understand that for the first 6 years of my mortgage payments, you're paying from 99.9% interest on every payment, all the way down to about 94% interest, and then the average American actually refinances within every 6 years. And that's not a bargain. And help the children understand what does it mean to pay off your mortgage earlier by paying a little bit more every month just towards principal. Children feel stronger for themselves and closer to mum and dad when mum and dad are not afraid to share the adult world when we speak with them, especially when we talk about protecting themselves. These are the private parts of your body, and if anyone touches you there, you know something is wrong. If it's mommy or daddy, we're bathing, or you go to the doctor, that's a different context. But if we don't speak to our children when they're young, who on earth do we think is going to teach them about the privacy of their body if it's not us? Because there are people on the street there who are dangerous people who've got sick minds, and our children, especially our daughters, but in fact even our sons, they are vulnerable. Children trust. They are wired to trust. They don't have a choice except to trust. You see a parent throw the infant in the air, and the child's giggling away, and you're going, the child has no fear because they 100% trust mum and dad. So that being the case, we can't allow that just to transfer to any other adult. So we need to actually help our children, and it doesn't have to be a conversation of instilling fear in the child. It's just information, because the education of that information, talk with them. These are examples. The next words are and I'll have to close on here. The most common place to expose our children to ourselves and our role modeling is taking place it's when you're sitting in your home. It's how we talk at the table, how we relax in front of our children, what we'll read, what we won't read, who we'll talk about, who we don't talk about, how we graciously and respectfully talk about people that our children know we don't necessarily get along with, but we're respectful and gracious about them anyway. They could be even extended members of the same family. But the children see, hey, I see that I don't have to be afraid of everybody, because my parents are teaching me that even when someone's very different to their value system, they are still respectful and gracious, even if they don't agree. So that's what matters much, much more. B'shivtecha is a play on the word shevet, which also means a rod of discipline. How you discipline bevesecha in your home. How we discipline our children, how we say yes, how we say no. If the kid is buggering me for 20, 30 times, no, I said no. I said, oh, why just take it? Wait, 1 second. How did they know, K-N-O-W, that my first no, N-O, was not a real no? How did they know to pester me for 20 times? And the answer is because they've seen in the past that if they keep pushing and pushing, eventually I'll give in. So they know my no is not necessarily for real. And so the kids are not doing that because they're manipulating. They're doing it because they need to know how far is far. What's right, what's wrong, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So, and I've got thousands of chances. It doesn't matter how many times I mess up, Hashem will keep my kid in my home at least till 18, sometimes 36. Till they're independent, yeah, about 36. So until they're grown up and adults and independent, the kids are dependent on us, and so we've got thousands of chances to get to them. I'll close. How we live outside our home. How we go to sleep at night. How we get up in the mornings. How we start our day. How we get up from adversity. How we get up from our own personal challenges in life, and our children see it. And even if we're not doing a great job at the beginning, but after a few weeks of looking back on how I was unfairly fired from that job, and then I stop the complaining and resentment, and I speak with a different maturity about Hashem really is doing this for my sake, and something good is going to come from it, even if I can't see it now. And our children see, hey, there's a transformational period where I'm transitioning from anger and outrage, complaining, to accepting, and then looking for the good, and then finding the good, and then seeing that was the best thing that ever happened to me. And how we get up from our own adversity and our own setbacks is what our children are getting from us, and it's all Vishinantam. I close and I truly mean it. Vishinantam is part of the context. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. You are our power, you are the only one. And these words should be, love Hashem with all your thoughts, your heart, love Hashem with all your life, with all your money, all your possessions, and every mitzvah, every measure Hashem measures out to you, love Hashem. Now these words, these messages of loving Hashem, that He's the only power, I'm in this world to love Hashem. What should I do with these? These words should be al levavecha, on your mind, on your thoughts, vishinantam levanecha, and repeat them to your children. So the entire mitzvah of chinuch, so to speak, is contained in this one word, which in context is actually me in a lifetime career of loving Hashem, which is like this. There's ups and downs, and it's okay, because my kid will learn plenty from my downs and then how I pick myself up. He might learn even more from that than if it was just up all the way. That's extremely unusual. It's probably more helpful that our kids' muscles get strengthened by seeing there's such a thing as falling and starting again, falling and starting again. So in the schus and merit of knowing that parenting is not really up to us, but we've got a lot to say in the matter anyway, and it's never too late to start again, because we're the commercial that's always changing. And in that schus we should be zeichet to much nachas from all our children to come on Mashiach and Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi.
So I went 5 minutes over.
Thank you. It's okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.